Hi, I'm Caroline Mitchell, Canine Behaviourist at Good Doggy. So I want to talk about behaviour sequences today. And if you've not heard of a behaviour sequence, it's essentially just a series of steps or behaviours that occur in a sequence that lead from one point, which is the trigger, to an end point. For example, a dog that is ready to go for a walk might have a behaviour sequence where it starts with, let's go for a WALK. That would be the trigger. They would hear you speak in that way and they would immediately start to think that they're going to go for a walk. And then there would be steps in between, which might include getting out of the chair, putting a cup in the sink. It might include putting shoes on, specific shoes as well, not just your normal shoes. These would be your walking shoes. Picking up a lead, and eventually perhaps putting poo bags in your pocket or whatever. The lead will go on and then you head out the door. So the end point then is going for your walk. So that's your behavior sequence. All of those steps in there are the sequence that lead from point A to point B. And our dogs are really, really good at finding these. They occur naturally in our day. We are very routined. Even if you don't feel like you are, there will be things that you do in your day that are routined and sequenced that way, and your dog will know them. He'll be able to predict outcomes of situations all the day long based on these exact scenarios. And it might feel a little bit like our dogs are being super smart in being able to do this, but let's not forget that actually our dogs don't have very much better things to do during the day. They are spending a lot of time watching us, learning from us, studying us. And it doesn't take very long before they start to understand what behaviours that we do that lead to other behaviours. So that one there, going for a walk, might be quite a long one. Some behaviour sequences can be quite small, just one step maybe. For example, perhaps when you open your fridge, your dog comes running because they think they're going to get a treat, or perhaps if you open a certain cupboard. So things like that. These behaviour sequences, they're occurring all around us all of the time, and where they exist, our dogs will know about them. And they're really important actually, because a behaviour sequence can lead to good things and it can lead to bad things. And as I say, our dogs use them to predict the outcome of actions. So if we understand them and we know about them, we can start using the behaviour sequences ourselves to help rehabilitate and retrain and redirect our dogs into new behaviours that start from a similar beginning and end point. So we can really change the way dogs feel about things using behaviour sequences. In fact, they're so powerful that on one occasion I was working with a lady and her dog had a form of separation anxiety. But what was interesting about her dog was that she could leave him at different times. Perhaps if she was just going to go out to the shops, or she was going to go and meet a friend, or something simple like that. She had no problem leaving her dog because she couldn't understand why he would be okay with her leaving out sometimes. But when she went to work, he really panicked and he didn't cope very well with that at all. And what we figured out is that in her going to work routine, it included going to the fridge and getting her lunchbox out. And that didn't occur in any of the other routines. So what we simply did was remove that from that routine. And then that lunchbox part of the routine did not trigger that panic response that the dog had associated with being left at that time. And the dog was able to cope really, really well. And that was a really, really simple fix. But understanding how that behaviour sequence worked and what was different between ones that were working and ones that weren't working was the clue that we needed to be able to help them. And that was a really simple way to fix it. They're not always that simple. But I think that just illustrates the power of behaviour sequences. So in a behaviour sequence, there might be a long list of steps. And we know that each step in that sequence will become connected to and associated with the end point. So this means then that each step within that sequence has the potential to be able to influence our dog's emotions in the same way that the end point would have. So for example, in that situation, perhaps where you're going to go for a walk, when you announce the going for a WALK, that will be associated with the action of going for a walk, which is very exciting. So now just using that word and using that tone and saying that phrase in that way will trigger that excitement. Then the next step in the sequence might be to put your cup in the sink. When it's followed the let's go for it WALK step, then that becomes step 2 in the sequence, and that adds more excitement because that is also now associated with going for a walk. Then the next step is to get your walk shoes on, and so on and so on. So as you go through these steps, that excitement will actually just continue to build up, and each single step will add to the last one. So by the time you end up going for a walk in that situation, your dog could be pretty frantic and pretty overexcited, to the point actually where walking them is actually really difficult, because all they can think about is getting out, and they're bouncing around. You can barely get the lead on. They're so overexcited that you can't really do very much with them. The same thing can happen with a dog that gets very anxious. Anxiety can build up too in exactly the same steps. So if a dog has learned to associate lots of steps in a routine that leads to a situation that frightens them or makes them anxious or whatever, then every step in that routine will also have a similar effect on them. So by the time you get to the end point, rather than them being just one level of anxious, they're now maybe 10 levels of anxious, because that has built up all the way through as every single step has progressed towards that. So we see this a lot with separation anxiety. When a dog is very bad and really very anxious about being left alone, they will have associated a whole lot of stuff with being left, and each one of those will add its own level of anxiety. So your dog will already have noticed a lot of sequences that already occur in your home and your routine. They're very smart, as I say. They don't have very much else to do all day but just to watch what we do and how we do and when we do. So they will have already started to build up lots and lots of patterns. Even puppies will very quickly learn patterns of behaviour. A very, very basic one that your puppy probably learned, it might have been the first thing they learned when they came into your house, was that when they sniff the floor, you pick them up and take them outside. So floor sniffing is the trigger, and getting outside is the end point. Now, what can happen with a short behaviour sequence like that is that other steps can get added over time. So sniffing the floor originally meant you took outside, but actually maybe then the next step from that is to play and to bark at the neighbour's dog or whatever. So they will keep adding steps to that the more that they see patterns happening around them. So when they go out and they do their playtime and you play with them and engage with them, eventually they'll start to put all these steps together. So they can put some quite long series together, but it takes time to add them on. So they'll add one at the beginning or one at the end as they notice new things being associated with stuff that they've already done. So they'll quickly realize that they're going for a walk if you put a certain pair of shoes on or a certain coat on, or you're going to go and leave them on their own if it's a different pair of shoes or a different coat. And that's where that behaviour sequence then changes. So just getting out the chair and saying, right, I'm off, that might be a trigger point, but at that point the dog has not worked out which kind of behaviour you're going to do. Are you going to be going out without them or with them? So they'll be looking for the next step or the third step in that sequence so they can get more clues as to where they're going. But as soon as they've figured out which one it is, then they know whether they should be getting excited or getting anxious or trying to resist something from happening. So some other ones might be the doorbell is a very common one, or a knock at the door. Over time, your dog might start to associate the sound of the gate in your front garden. Then they might add on car doors slamming outside. And then before that, the sounds of a car's tyres on gravel or on the road, something like that, going at a certain speed. So they've added extra steps over time. But originally that started off with doorbell means visitor. And then on the other side, doorbell means visitor. And then it might also mean getting loads of attention, or it could mean being really afraid. So now the sequence starts with car tyres outside. The fear will start to build up then because they get scared when people come and visit. So that's how that quickly can become a sequence that makes them afraid. And that will happen every time car tyres then start to come outside your home, even if it's just a delivery driver or somebody visiting your next neighbour, but it will start to trigger that fear straight away. So these are very, very important in working with these types of behaviour problems, we need to figure these out and understand them, because they will lead us to better solutions to these problems. Another behaviour sequence would be getting the lead on, means at the end of the walk, means going to the car. Then they'll start to associate different places on the walk with getting the lead on, which means going into the car and going home. So they start to resist recall at certain places in their walks. And then what we do then is then we try to put the lead on at a different time, and then they just add that into their sequence. So rather than it being at the point where the tree is, now it's much further in front of that, maybe it's 5 minutes from the end, and so on. Eventually they'll stop wanting to recall at all, because that could be the time that you're going to put them in the car and take them home. So that behaviour sequence has got a little bit broken for us, because what we're trying to do is keep them safe and get them home, and it's actually ended up breaking the whole recall. Sometimes dogs can associate things like waking up with getting their breakfast and starting their day and then going for a walk. So those dogs then can start to manipulate that behaviour sequence, just like they did with the recall. Start to fail to respond to recall, they can start trying to wake their owner up earlier, because the sooner their owner gets up, then that sequence is triggered, and then they get their breakfast and their day starts. Some dogs will, if you're working from home, can notice behaviour sequences start with things like, okay, bye, or something like that. So, if you work on Zoom a lot and you have lots of kind of meetings, maybe every time you finish a meeting, you say, okay, bye, you close your computer down, then you go and make a cup of tea, or you visit the bathroom, or you do both. Your dog will have established that behaviour sequence. And of course, that behaviour sequence has absolutely nothing to do with your dog, but he still will notice that those are the things that you're going to be doing next. So they're looking at behaviour sequences around them that actually don't even always affect them. So they'll know lots and lots of our habits and routines. So none of the responses and behaviours you get are probably accidental. When your dog is getting in your way while you're trying to make your cup of tea, he knows how you make a cup of tea. He knows that you walk up here and you pick up your sugar, and then you walk back down the other side and you get your mug, and then you come back for your kettle. But if he gets in the way, he gets a pet, maybe. So he's figured all this stuff out. This is not happening just by accident. So now we know what they are, and we can identify already where problems might exist. Maybe we have a problem with overexcitement. Maybe we have the problem with anxiety. We can now look at that behaviour sequence, and we can see if we can make some changes to try and change it, and to try and help our dog stay much calmer. So let's talk about anxiety, for example. Let's talk about the dog that has separation anxiety. So what we need to do is we need to have the same trigger point and the same end point. So the trigger point is going to be the bit where we go, right, I'm going to leave. And that could be standing up. It could be a word that you're already saying when you're going to leave. Maybe you talk to your dog, perhaps you do something, you shout up the stairs to other people in the house, something like that. So your trigger point will stay the same, and the end point is going to be that you're going to leave them. But the steps in between are going to be changed in such a way that your dog will recognize them enough, but they're not original triggers. So for example, picking up your shoes, but rather than putting them on, you take them with you through the front door. Maybe you introduce a new item. Perhaps you have a new dog bed that you get out the cupboard and you put it down for them. Maybe you offer them a treat or a lick mat, something they've not had before. So we're adding some little novel steps in here, and we're changing steps they already know so they don't feel too familiar. Your coat, for example, you might just fling that over your shoulder, which you don't usually do, and walk out with it like that. Maybe you've already put your bag in the car, stuff like that. So just like that lady with her lunchbox, we got her lunchbox into the car before she even had her breakfast. Then she came back, got on with her normal morning, and when she went then to leave for work, she could leave that step out. So for us, we're going to add some extra steps in. So let's say that you put your shoes, you hold your shoes in one hand and you fling your coat over your shoulder. Your bag's already in the car, so all you now have to do is pick up the keys, and maybe they're just in a slightly different place as well. So it just feels a little bit odd. And you're going to walk out the door, and then you're going to come straight back in again. So you were left the house for a tenth of a second, maybe. And then your dog will realize that this set of steps leads to you just disappearing out of sight for a moment and coming back. And that feels safe, and that's okay. And you're going to repeat that over and over again, basically until your dog starts to get really bored of this routine, because they're just watching you just picking all your stuff up, walking out the door, then coming back in again and putting it all back again where it came from. So this becomes really very, very boring to them. So as opposed to the original routine, which built up every single step, became more and more associated with anxiety, this routine is being associated with boredom and nothing exciting and nothing interesting. There's nothing good about you coming back in. There's nothing good about you leaving. There's nothing good about it at all. It's not good. It's not bad. It's not anything. So this new routine is now going to be the routine that leads to boredom. And once that happens, then you can then start to just increase the amount of time that you're out of the house, because your dog is not being triggered by all of these individual steps to believe that they're going to be unsafe. And as long as they do have a safe environment, then hopefully we'll never trigger that feeling of being unsafe. So they'll always be able to remain in that kind of state of, this is boring, this silly game that mom keeps playing over and over again. The key here is, of course, is to keep the, as I say, the end point and the beginning point the same, but to create this very boring routine around it and to repeat it over and over and over again. That's how you would do that with separation anxiety, but maybe let's talk about what it might look like if you're trying to pass a dog. Perhaps your dog, this behavior sequence starts with your dog noticing another dog in the distance. That might be the trigger point then that says, I'm going to start to get anxious. And as you get closer and closer, that will also build on that anxiety. They'll start to then predict that other dog coming closer to them, what's going to happen next. And that situation will quickly escalate. So we can add a behavior sequence in here too. So as soon as we notice that there's a dog in the distance and your dog's quite anxious about it and we're going to try and pass them, what we want to do is we want to change some steps that are happening. So for example, we could change direction. You probably don't do that very much, and go the other way. So they've kind of gone into their meerkat stance. They can see the dog in the distance, but you've gone, nope, we're going to go the other way, and off you go. Changing direction can be really, really useful. You could swap sides with them. So maybe they're used to just walking on the left-hand side of you. Suddenly you've put them on the right-hand side. And now when you're going to pass the dog, they're going to see you all the time. Every time they look at that dog, you're going to be in their way. We can add a clicker into that because that changes the sequence as well. They're not used to you using a clicker as a part of this training. So it changes the way things feel enough that you might be able to get a bit closer. You might have to give them quite a lot of distance as you go around, which again is something that you've not done before. Normally you would just try and attempt to pass, but this time you've gone very wide. You've given them a big amount of distance and space, and you're between them, the clicker's going. So lots of things have changed about this routine. And as long as the end point remains the same, as I say, the start point is that trigger. There's a dog in the distance. The end point in this situation is going to be safety, just like separation anxiety. That's all your dog wants, is to feel safe. And when we come round, as long as we've managed to kind of maintain that emotion, keep that nice and low, we've made enough changes, we're in control. When we get to the end, they'll still be safe. So now this new set of routines leads to safety instead of leading to panic and self-defense kind of mode, emergency mode. And then let's think about a dog that maybe that's territorial. So a territorial dog who's trying to protect their environment. The initial trigger will be the doorbell or the car door slamming or the gate going, something like that. So that's where the trigger point starts. And now we need to try and make sure that this leads to safety rather than your dog going into protection mode of the house. So maybe your routine, rather than just heading straight for the door and opening it with your dog running around your feet, you're trying to hold them back, somebody's shouting in the background, perhaps that's you, there's all of this kind of chaos going on. Instead of doing that, let's create a routine which involves your dog maybe sitting at the end of the hall, waiting for you while you walk down towards the door. And again, like separation anxiety, you might practice this a lot of times in order to make sure that your dog feels this kind of boredom setting in with this, and you can ring your own doorbell a lot of times. You would ring the bell rather than just going through that normal routine. Usher your dog up to the end of the hall, get them to sit there, walk to the door, open, shut the door, go back to your dog, and then they get their reward. You do that often enough, then again, the end point is still safety. The trigger point was still the door getting knocked, and then everything in between is what changed. And now this new routine, when you put it into practice in real life, is a routine that is associated with being safe rather than being protective and being successful at being protective. So this is kind of how we can change routines to suit ourselves and to kind of get rid of that sort of anxious behavior that we're seeing so far. Sometimes we'll be mid-sequence and things will get a little bit emotional. Things will become very, very inflated. So in particular, maybe when you're working with a dog out and about, your dog has seen a dog and it's going to make them scared. Perhaps something's gone wrong and they've got completely over threshold in the middle and they've lost control of themselves. You've lost control of them. The whole situation has escalated. So what do we do here? So this is the time to stop and do nothing and to allow that emotion to de-escalate itself. If you can see emotions rising while you're working on something, then taking lots of little breaks in between allows for that to happen. But sometimes we get caught out. So you'll be out working with your dog or the doorbell's rang and you're trying to get them calm and the next thing the doorbell rings again. So the person at the door is obviously impatient, or perhaps they haven't realized if you've noticed that they're there, that kind of thing. Whatever can go wrong in your training, stuff sometimes does go wrong. So you're basically just going to stop and wait. And once that emotion has drained out of the situation, as long as your dog is safe and you're safe and everybody's safe, then this is the best way to handle this situation. Let all of that emotion drain out and then start again. Go back to your sequence. Go back to the sequence that's going to lead to safety. If you do separation anxiety and you get caught outside and then your dog goes over threshold, then stop, repeat it, and get back to that place of boredom again. With overexcitement, this is important. So check out my threshold video, because the threshold video explains a lot about what happens to your dog emotionally as they approach this magical threshold line that people talk about all the time. How to manage them when they go over threshold and how to manage their behavior in between and in this sequence again there. But with overexcitement, all those steps we mentioned earlier, perhaps when it comes to taking your dog for a walk, taking a gap, a space, a little break in between each one of those steps allows that emotion to settle. So remember I said to you that every single step is associated with the endpoint, so that every single step adds excitement. So if you're not able to change the steps in the sequence, this is how you manage that. You just take breaks. So you'll do step number 1, your dog's emotion will start to build up, he'll start to get excited, and then you stop, and then he will relax again. And he hasn't gone too far, he hasn't got very excited, so it won't take very much for him to come back again and to relax back, let that emotion kind of drain down again. And then you do step number 2, so we go back up again another level, and then you go back again, and then you do step 3, and then you take a break, and then you do step 4, and you take a break. And basically what happens is you end up with this little ripple effect, where the behavior just has these little mini peaks, but it's all manageable, rather than adding one step to the next, and then before you know it, your behavior has gone way above, and it will take forever to get them to come back down again. So that's behavior sequences. Hopefully you can see how these are really important in your dog's behavior in terms of how their emotions are managed and how they predict what's going to happen in their day. Sometimes they're predicting good things, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just predicting what you're doing and it has nothing to do with them, but they'll understand all of those sequences that is happening around them, and they'll know them all, and they'll know exactly what's going to happen next in those sequences. So you'll probably spend the rest of the day now looking at your dog, thinking about what you're doing, thinking about what they're doing, and you'll start to notice loads more of your own. So have fun doing that, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care for now. Bye bye.